Hi, and welcome to Fair Perspectives, the official podcast of the pro-human movement, brought to you by the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. I'm your host, Melissa Chen, and my co-host, who you will hear from shortly, is angeleduardo. Today, we're speaking with William Reusch. William is a Los Angeles-based high school teacher, social scientist, and host of the Cylinder Radio podcast, which focuses on deep explorations of controversial and contentious topics. Through his work, Will is working to change the standard school model from one that exchanges imagination for compliance to one that uses imagination to innovate. In this episode, we discuss his role as an educator in public and private school systems, political differences amongst teachers, his run-ins with Nikole Hannah-Jones and other proponents of CRT, tackling controversial topics in the classroom, CRT and K-12 education, the increasing distrust between parents and teachers, and his approach to constructive engagement on social media. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. William Reusch.
Will Reusch, thank you so much for joining us today on Fair Perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really, really cool.
Now, you and I know each other a little bit, but I think too few people know who you actually are and what your background is. So why don't you give us a little bit of an overview?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just a high school teacher. I've been teaching high school for 16. I'm going to my 17th year in Los Angeles. Very diverse communities in Los Angeles, like poor, homeless, gang-infested areas, and then like rich, like private schools, that are in Beverly Hills. So I've kind of gotten a whole bunch of different takes on different communities of the city. And teach social studies, every area of social studies. So I've written sociology classes, and so now I'm focused on more on civics, government, and a little bit of U.S. history too. I've been teaching U.S. history straight through. But in 2017 or 18, I was watching some of the starts of this culture war stuff on the universities with Nick Christakis and Brett Weinstein, Jordan Peterson, and people like that. And I go, oh, there's elements of this in K through 12, but no one seemed to talk about it because people don't talk about K through 12 education very much. And so I started bringing up some of these issues in my classroom, and the kids were kind of responding to it because they were seeing certain things, and there was good dialogue happening. And I came home, I was telling my wife about it, who does online marketing using social media. And she's like, you should put this stuff on Instagram. It's like, what? It's like, yeah, put your class on Instagram. People will like it. It's like, that feels so weird talking to my phone. Like, it just feels very strange to me. But when I framed it as it's an expansion of my classroom, I was like, okay, I'm going to bring this kind of discussions that I have, kind of topics that I go over in my classroom just to social media and put it out there. And it resonated with people. And so I did that. And then I started a podcast just as an excuse because there were people I wanted to talk to, from who had very different perspectives on life. And I wanted to just talk to them. And I was like, this is valuable. These conversations having people are valuable. Maybe I could just share it. So seems like everyone has a podcast nowadays. So sure, I'll start a podcast. So in 2019, I started a podcast, and it's called Cylinder Radio because the idea is that it's that's like a circle, and then that's like a rectangle. So like it's like, three-dimensional. So you take like a controversial issue and you kind of work out all the different angles of it. It's been really fun. I got to meet a lot of different people, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm up to now. And it's great. Really
That's interesting. I was going to ask you about the title of the podcast there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you as a history teacher in particular, as someone whose expertise lies in that area, recent years must have been particularly frustrating for you. What has that been like? Because I know some people who are history teachers and scholars of this sort of thing, and they are being driven crazy by all the madness going around. What do you think? What's going on with you?
I'm biased, but I think like all problems can be solved with good education. So, a lot of these issues are just ignorance, and we're all ignorant. So there's nothing wrong with being ignorant, but we should try to fix that. You don't be willfully ignorant. And if you are ignorant, then you should, just be like, okay, well, what am I missing from this? And that's what education is supposed to be. So it's really frustrating. Yeah, all kinds of stuff, whether it's our federalist system that we have, just our history, our really ugly history and beautiful history, and how they kind of work together. And when you look at history, you see that it's terrible, and a lot of good can come from those terrible things. So we kind of have to work it out. And people are so polarized now; they're so stuck in their camp, so they have to only get a piece of history. You and I were talking a little bit earlier about Frederick Douglass. It's like it's the whole 4th of July speech. It's not just the part that you isolate. So that's been frustrating, but I see why. I think that my field of education has been really corrupted by, political agendas and things like that. And that's been really frustrating.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Will, about, the fact that you do teach in the LA area, the Los Angeles area. Mm-hmm. And it seems like Los Angeles in particular, California, has some unique kinks going on with education right now. There's a lot of news articles about what's going on with the liberated ethnic studies requirements. It seems that it's a radical time for education, and that a lot of this is coming top down, either state level or county level. What is your experience with this in Los Angeles?
Yeah, so I agree with you. It starts, colleges of education and stuff like that are just overwhelmingly on one side of the political aisle. I'm a big viewpoint diversity person. So I worked with Heterodox Academy. I love Jonathan Haidt's work and things like that. So yeah, it's the best. And the problem isn't that left is bad. It's that it's only one piece of the understanding of it. And when the teachers unions are aligned with the Democratic Party, and then all of the colleges of education are left. I mean, I've been a Democrat voter my whole life, but I realize that there's something missing. So I taught in public schools up until 2013. And then I just wasn't a fit. I just couldn't do the things that I wanted to do. So I found a private school to go teach at. And that's where I've been for a while now. I'm going into whatever it is, 9 or 10 years at this private school where they basically let me do my thing, but I'm still connected with a lot of my friends who teach public school. And it's very, very politicized. I mean, it just is. And it's there's strange things. There's Black History Month, which is fine, great. And then within that, there's LGBTQ week within Black History Month, and they lump them together saying this is the same thing. So it's a lot of this very interesting kind of just political moves by the districts and things like that. And then just in general in education, it's happening in Los Angeles, especially there's a lot more kind of bureaucracy, and there's consultants. So there's less teachers. Teachers are getting a bigger load. When I was teaching public school, I had 48 kids in a class. And I was teaching in a tough, kind of gang-infested area. And it was me and 48 kids. And these were I had 3 pregnant girls and kids with, ankle bracelets on and stuff like that. And they needed personal attention. But instead, they were all over the place. And we had a ton of just consultants coming in, telling us about the newest fad and how to teach, where what we needed was just smaller class sizes and get back to the basics of teach these kids how to read, teach them basic arithmetic, not teach them a lot of this stuff that is actually out there, teaching them victimization and stuff like that. I know that's a political point that you get on Tucker Carlson, but there is that stuff going on, at least here.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to people who would react by saying something to the effect of, it's always been political. This isn't a new thing. It's just that the politics, we're trying to change them. And the reason we're trying to change them is because the status quo wasn't working, or the status quo was actually leaving things out or doing things the wrong way. It's similar to the ignorance thing, right? Everyone claims that they are ignorant, right? And it's always so it's kind of weird because the accusation can fly in both directions, and there can be merit to it in both directions. So what do you think of that?
For sure. I think that what's changed, and I think this seems fairly recent. Maybe it's a Trump thing. Maybe it's right before Trump thing. I don't know. But it's not there. It was always political, but you could have political discussions and not say the person who disagrees with me politically is a bad, immoral human. And that's, I think, where the big change is, there would always be teachers who would have political stances, and someone would be left, someone would be right, maybe more left, whatever. But if one of their students had a different perspective, it was let's hear it out. And then I might be able to defeat it, which is fine. You have really bad ideas. That's my job to kind of maybe highlight some of the bad elements of your thinking. But to say that you're a bad person, not the idea is bad, or the stance has flaws that you don't see, or could lead to unintended consequences or anything like that. It's that you're an immoral person for thinking this way or supporting that politician or that political stance. That is what I think has changed. That seems to be
I think it's one thing to say or to make the claim that it is political. this is a political framing or an approach, and almost everything is. But it's another when we're gambling with kids' futures. It seems to me that a few things have kind of become cemented more and more increasingly as dogma in education. And one is this idea of equity, of making sure that kids all have this equal outcomes, even in testing, to the point of changing testing standards, right? And so we see that in testing, we see that in admissions criteria. And so this seems to me to be quite a wholesale rejigging of what the system was. And it seems like it's also, very difficult for teachers like yourself to question. And that's why I applaud you for putting your thoughts so much out there. We are living in a time where I think that just questioning certain narratives is seen as dangerous. And in a way, like by putting all this debates that you're having on social media, you're painting a target on your back. I know you're modeling, we're modeling the kind of behavior that you want your students to actually look up to and think like, okay, this is an approach to questioning all these things in life. We should be open-minded. You're modeling that, but you're also exposing yourself to, I guess, a lot of negative attacks. Have you experienced any consequences of expanding your classroom to social media?
Yeah. I mean, luckily, the school that I'm at, though, it's strange. I don't know how I ended up here. I never went to private school. I'm not part of the community, but it's a modern Orthodox Jewish school, which I needed to go to a place that was like, that could just let me do my thing. Because at public school, I would have gotten fired a long time ago. And I kind of saw the writing on the walls, even though it was before the culture wars kind of took ramped up the way that they did. But there's something in this culture that now I teach in that it's like leave no stone unturned. So I've said things, I've stepped in things. I'm, got like back and forth with Nicole Hannah-Jones, and she blocked me and sent people after me and stuff. And then letters come into my school that say, essentially your employer racist, sexist, homophobe. And that would have been a wrap. If I was at, a school, like I'm friends with Paul Rossi in New York, that would have happened at a lot of these private schools here, whatever, in LA, then it'd been trouble. If I was at a public school, it would have been trouble. I have friends who teach public, and they are terrified of saying anything. But I'm at this weird situation, this weird community, beautiful community, that it goes into the leaders of the school. They're like, hey, just so you know, we got these letters, and they have like a whole bunch of letters, and I'm like, oh, they're like, keep doing your thing.
Wow.
So the students like me, the parents like me. And the administration there sees what I'm doing. So they've been extremely supportive. So I'm just lucky. I mean, I'm very lucky to be put in this situation. So it's not, there's actually kind of a interesting thing. I don't get poison ivy. Like my dad doesn't get it. My sister doesn't get it. So when we were kids and football went into the poison ivy, they'd be like, all right, we're just going to get it. And I'd just go get it. And it wouldn't form rashes on me. It's very interesting. And the situation I'm in now with teaching, is similar. It's similar to that, not just where I'm teaching, but also my wife is awesome, immigrant entrepreneur. So her financial situation helps alleviate some of the pressure off of me for our family. And because of that, there's a lot of teachers that are like, this is going on, but I can't say anything. And I'm like, I'll go get the football. I'll take it. So you can paint a target on my back. It's not just that I'm more courageous. It's really not. I know that I'm in a very unique situation. I think it'd be a disservice to not use it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because you don't have the visible markers that would give you that kind of force field, socially speaking, right? Like you're very much the center of the bullseye in terms of,
Oh, you should see my 23andMe.
That was the most diplomatic way anyone has ever said the phrase, you are a cis white man. Like that is the most diplomatic. That was an art form. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. My 23andMe came back and, it was like, all right, give me something. Because it doesn't always look good. The visuals aren't great.
That's
and
amazing.
I'm 99.6% German and then 0.4% British. So nothing.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, but you have this amazing force field. It's funny. I have a friend who doesn't get poison ivy either. Like nothing happens
yeah.
to him. And it's he had a similar thing in the Boy Scouts, where they'd send him in to check.
Yeah. So that's I take that as my role for all of the kind of heterodox, open-minded teachers out there. That's why I started like the community that I have on for the Heterodox Academy, the Teachers for Heterodoxy community, and all that kind of stuff is like, I'll be your mouthpiece.
I don't know if it's that much of a mystery though, Will, because I've seen, Angel sent me your Instagram page, and I was like looking through it, and some of the topics, even your YouTube channel, some of the topics you touch on are really, really, really contentious. And I know your students are watching this, right? You're debating the Second Amendment. Yeah, you're debating abortion, the morality of abortion. I mean, these are really hot topics. I don't even right now, I see no point in like, putting out an opinion after the next mass shooting, because I know it's going to go nowhere online. So I don't even, try to do it. But here you are putting out videos and you're debating it, and you're kind of modeling that cylinder, that kind of theory that you just discussed. So I kind of see why you don't have that target on your back, because I don't think you're being, like the way your approach to these very contentious topics is so even-handed, so fair, and you're not trolly. I think when you're trolly, you have that kind of troll behavior, that's when you run into a problem. People do try to take you down and can take you down a lot more easily if you embody that. So yeah, I'm impressed that you've kind of you've chosen to tackle these very, very contentious topics. Do you do that in the classroom as well? And how do you handle when students have like, they're probably as divided as America?
I mean, the school I'm at, I mean, politically it's very diverse, because my like superpower for teaching is I am not that bright. So I am trying to figure this out in real time. Like, I don't know. Here's why I think mass shootings are happening, but this is the best I've come up with. And I'm very curious. Like, this is a pretty serious thing. So I'm trying to look at all perspectives, because I'm really trying to figure it out. Like, it's very sincere. There's no like, who I am here is who I am. You meet me out there, like who I am in the classroom. I'm just a very, very, very curious person. So I'm trying to figure this out. And if someone says that I'm wrong, I embrace that. A big thing is like seeking disconfirmation, because why would I want to hold on to a bad idea? If you're saying like, Will, you are wrong about this, then my ears perk. Like, tell me, what am I missing here? Because I want to know. And then I have to like hear it. And then I like weigh that out with what I've already kind of established. And it's like, well, I don't know, but what about this? What about this? It's a lot of questions. So when kids push back, I just ask them questions. And what that does, like Socratic method, it reveals that they don't know much either. They know very little about, gun laws and things like that. So they could have a really strong stance. And then I just ask questions to my students, and they go, I don't know. And I go, yeah, so maybe I know. Well, what about this? And I'll argue from their point, maybe even better than them. And then they're like, oh, okay, maybe I should look into this more. Like, yeah, that's what we're here for. Let's do it together. It's just it's just trying to facilitate this like community of just being curious about how do we find the best answers and the best pathway through this stuff. It seems so simple to me. I'm just like a first principles thinker. I don't know.
No, I think it is simple as long as your thinking or your kind of your behavior hasn't been hijacked by something that dictates it, right? So there's the kind of I as somebody raised Catholic, I always think about this. The youth pastor saying, "Oh, we question our faith all the time," right? And I'm like, "Sure you do, as long as the answer gets you right back to where you started, right? You don't want to go anywhere weird." That's so, that's just something I picked up on. But I think you're right. And I actually was going to ask you what, you talked about like the, the administration and the bureaucracy and all that sort of stuff. But what about the students? Because, you mentioned earlier we were talking and you mentioned Nicholas Christakis, and that was a direct sort of encounter with students that he had. Do you have something similar like that? What's going on from the students' perspective?
So one of the things that I do is I form really good relationships with my students. So every day I have lunch. I don't have lunch like the faculty lounge. I have lunch with a different student. So first day of school, I pass around a big calendar, they sign it, and then we have lunch together. So I get to know them well. And when you get to know someone well, then you kind of like see the humanity in them and they see it in me. So, it could be, whatever, drama nerds. It could be the captain of the basketball team. It could be whatever. It's like all different kinds of different people. And then I get to know them. Like I really want to get to know them. And then that helps them to go, all right, well, he might have an idea that I think is wrong, but he actually cares about me. So, all right, well, let me try and figure this whole thing out. So that's a big thing. Like it's shocking though, how many people don't talk to their parents or their siblings because they're like a Trump supporter or they're a Biden supporter or whatever. That is interesting to me. I say something like, you have a friend, you have a next door neighbor that you've known for 20 years and you know them to be a good person. And one day they show up in a MAGA hat. You have two choices. One is your neighbor who you've known for 20 years, and you've been through all these things with, is not who you thought they were. Or maybe MAGA hat wearers aren't what you thought they were. And it's shocking how many people do the first one. But I try to always lean into hoping that my students will choose the second one. And again, I do it from I'm a school teacher. We're soft-hearted people. Like I'm going in from a soft standpoint of like, I actually care. Like if I'm against affirmative action, it's because I actually care about, minority students doing well in their futures. Like it's not a trolling thing. It's like, I actually care a lot.
Yeah. And the inverse happens as well, where, if someone, if you suddenly see a really close friend in a MAGA hat, you're going to immediately just say, oh, well, it turns out I was wrong about the last 20 years. Right. Yeah. And then the inverse kind of happens too, where if you see somebody who maybe you don't know them at all, but they're wearing the right t-shirt and they're saying the right things, but then they do something that you would otherwise disagree with, you're more likely to just let that go or ignore it or rationalize it.
Yeah.
And that kind of, to me also, is an interesting consequence of this kind of increasing view of the world through the lens of race, because, I think the big debate in the last couple years in K-12 has been just how pervasive critical race theory or critical race theory tenets have been in K-12 curricula around the world, around America. And this just seems to be such a hot button issue right now. And this is the kind of issue that people are now increasingly just adjudicating entire news stories, or people. You look at somebody and now you've elevated this, immutable characteristic as such a sole, just a way to look at this person, and almost like you can tell everything about a person, whether or not privileged, not privileged, should go to Harvard, not go to Harvard, that kind of thing. And it's that's where that becomes very pernicious. I know, Will, that you have had very complex debates with critical race theory advocates, other teachers who do teach it in their schools, and what is your view of what you're witnessing, at least in your neck of the woods? Because I know education in America is so unique. It's not federalized in the same way, and everything depends on school districts, the structure of the schools. Are you in a charter school? Are you in a public school? But how are you viewing this like national debate about critical race theory and potentially the backlash to it?
Yeah. I really, and this is like, might seem like a little thing, but it's big to me, is I really try not to have debates. It really is discussions. Because I think debate is like, I'm going to try and win. I'm going to try and prove them wrong. And I'm really not. I'm trying to understand it. Like if I'm wrong, I want to know. I think in a debate, you'll intentionally strawman, you'll intentionally ignore the problems with your arguments and stuff like that. And that's not an interest to me. So I've tried to have conversations, not even to say critical race theory is bad, but trying to say like, why are you doing this? So critical race theory, the way that I think that's what's happening is I was invited on like Fox News and Glenn Beck and stuff. And they just wanted to talk about how, like, literally they were saying like, it's terrible. There's nothing to it. It's all nonsense. I don't think it is. I think there's elements of it that are obviously really flawed, but I think there's like, if you take an example is like, so critical race theory would be you look at a law and you try to break it down to see, is there racism built in it that's not overt, that's not like right on the surface. So I look at the war on drugs. What John Ehrlichman said under Nixon, very racially motivated. They do the war on drugs to lock up people that are like, undesirable people. It included, racial elements of that. And then it works. Drug use is the same among all, white and black people, but then incarceration rates and arrest rates and all that stuff. I think that's a good tool to use. The problem is it's not meant to be the only tool. It's one to then take you the next step of like, how do we fix it? And is it really there? Let's break it down with some good social science. And that's what's not happening. So it's just the first part of let's uncover racism wherever we can find it and not do any of the other stuff of like confirming, is that even true? And then if it is, what do we do about it? So they're giving this like agenda for kids to point out how they're just been wronged over and over and over again, and then not give them any pathway out of that. And that just seems cruel to me. Like you had Eric Smith on the podcast. Like his whole thing is like, this is the opposite of empowering. And I agree completely. That's a real problem. And that's what's going on, because it's just so easy. It's so easy to say that racism is bad. Agreed. So let's just say that. And then, we can just structure everything around that very basic premise. And then I think a lot of people, white people, especially like, soft-hearted, more progressive people are so scared. John McWhorter says like they pee in their pants a little bit to push back at all. So they just kind of go along with it because they're so scared. And I am not going to just go along with it. Mm-hmm. I want to know more.
And you've had discussions.
Yeah. There's one that went
about
pretty viral.
CRT.
Yeah.
So, well, first you talked to Mark Lamont Hill, who I really admire his desire to do this and willingness to do it.
Yeah.
And he definitely knows his stuff. So when someone comes on and doesn't know what they're talking about, you're going to know, right? Yeah. But what was your experience talking to him like?
It was fine. I think that he kind of is like more in the debate mindset though. Like he's really sharp and he's fast. So he'll just, and then I'm slow. Right. So I'm like trying to keep up.
It's also network TV. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's always breaks for commercials and stuff like that. And I think that, I agree with you. I liked what he was doing. It was really cool to be able to talk to him, but he didn't seem super open-minded to what I was saying. Cause I was bringing up like just the importance of viewpoint diversity within the Black community for kids, considering that Paul Rossi was one of the reasons he was let go was he wanted to bring in Glenn Lowry into his class. And he was told that would confuse his students. Like, this is absurd. So I wanted to just bring that in. I'm always looking for common ground, even with the one that went viral that you were talking about with like the 3 critical race theory educators.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Melissa, did you see that?
I did. Oh, no, I did see that. And the part that really got me was the debate on whiteness. And
whiteness is property and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm in this world now where there's like a couple of like teacher Instagram, teacher influencer. Influencer makes you want to throw up. Like, I guess that kind of thing. And there's a couple of them, and they're very like into this, critical race theory thing. And one guy named Alfred Brooks, he calls him Chivy Brooks, and he's like, well fashioned out and stuff like that. And there's a lot of stuff. They're very political t-shirts and stuff. And he put one out that said something like, teach CRT regardless of what your state laws say, or something like that. And I just commented like, isn't this worth having a conversation about? Because I've been trying to have conversations with critical race theorists, and they won't. So then he set it up, and it was me, him, and then a woman named Louisa Duran, who's like a critical social justice, like a consultant, and then Kate Slater, who has her degree in critical race theory, and she's the assistant dean at somewhere like a good school, I don't know, Brandeis, I think. And anyway, so they came on, and I wanted to have a discussion. I wanted to see, like, I thought critical race theory was a bad idea. I thought a lot of this stuff is critical social justice stuff. I had James Lindsay on my podcast, so I was like, he was kind of breaking it down for me, and it's like, oh, this seems bad. So I was like, I want to go in and see what's going on. And right away, it was brutal. And so what I did was I tapped into curiosity and I just kept asking questions and kind of kept them on the line. And they, were saying things that were wild stuff. I mean, the Socratic method is toxic. They were saying the Constitution should be burned. They were saying like really, really wild things just because I was asking questions. And at the end of it, what was kind of interesting to me was at the end of it, they were like, be careful what you ask for, Will. You went into the lion's den. They were so confident that they like owned me. And then we signed off, and then, people started commenting and it kind of caught on. And then they were really upset and they wanted to shut it down. They were like, delete it, get rid of it off of feeds and stuff like that. And then I recorded it and released it on my YouTube because I want more people to see it, but the only people who could see it was on his Instagram. Anyway, so he threatened to sue me and stuff, but I wanted everyone to see that. I was just saying, like, it's not for me. I don't want to be like famous. I want everyone to see that because I think it's one of the most like upfront. This is what this thinking goes to, especially when people ask questions, which like a 10th grader is going to ask a lot of questions about this stuff. And this is the way you're going to respond. You're going to shame them for even asking the question and just say, you need to obey. And I thought it was a really, really important conversation that I was just lucky to be a part of. But I wanted it to go viral as much as possible. I really did. Because I think it's just so on there. But like he was just like last week, he was a presenter at the biggest teacher conference in the country in Orlando. It was like, I don't know. It was like a lot of people. I don't know what it was. It was like 5,000 people or all teachers just like celebrating. Like this is very mainstream in the teaching community, the way that they were kind of thinking.
Let me get this straight. So they actually were okay. They thought it was a great conversation, but it wasn't only until the comments started surfacing, and they saw the reactions to the video that they became a little censorious and wanted to not post it. Is that what happened?
They thought that, I was kind of owned, that I looked foolish, that I looked like I didn't know what I was talking about, that I looked like, ignorant and all that kind of stuff, which sure. But they, I think that once people came in and said like, you guys are out of your minds, they said that was, violent words and stuff. They felt very threatened. Like I literally had letters come to my school. I got people saying all kinds of terrible stuff, but letters sent to my school like this person needs to go, trying to get me fired and stuff. That they said, get this, this guy is posting our conversation without approval. So, go after him. He's not paying us for our emotional labor or something along those lines. Oh. So, basically go after
these same people, the same people that you did the video with, they're the ones saying, oh, wow.
The ones who said that. I was like, can we just continue? Can we have more conversations? Like, let's read books together. Let's do this. And they were like, sure. Now they blocked me. They immediately blocked me because I was asking them more questions privately. They just wanted to shut me down. It was really like frustrating because I was like, I was legitimately excited when that started. I was like, I can't believe this is happening. These are like real hardcore, like critical race theory people in education saying it needs to be taught in all schools and stuff. And they're going to just talk to me, open forum like this. This is incredible. And I even said like, this is amazing that this is happening. And they're like, well, it's one of the tenets of critical race theory is that you have debates and discussions. So of course we would never not
civil
do that.
Discourse. I remember that. Yeah.
Block.
Right.
Block. All right.
Wow. Well, okay. But so I was going to ask you if you feel that these people that you spoke to are kind of emblematic of the larger movement or if they can kind of be dismissed as, fringe people, but it seems like they're very prominent people.
Yeah. Yes. So they're fringe and they're fringe and everyone is scared to call them fringe or to say like, oh, that seems like a crazy idea. So there's a lot of cowardice. In education, there's a ton of cowardice. So they just won't say it. And they'll say it to me privately. I got a lot of teachers who are at this stupid conference who are like, man, that was really terrible. And then they're there like celebrating because you look left, you look right. And black man's up there saying, racial justice, you better clap. It's so baffling, the lack of courage to just say like, wait a second, I don't know, this doesn't seem right.
And how prepared were you when you went in there? Because, you mentioned that you spoke to James Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest thing to say is that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and that, he's a terrible source from which to base your questioning and your reasoning on CRT.
I mean, he knows. James has always been really sweet to me, but it's his approach that I think it really rubs people the wrong way. I think he knows his stuff. So I went in, it was him. I've had a conversation with a lot of people that were against it. So I was going in thinking like, this is a bad idea. So what am I missing? I was very sincere. I really was. I was sincere. Like, I might be missing something here. I hope I get to find it. And instead I got confirmation bias, which I was not looking for.
You said in education that courage is in short supply. And I don't know, I just did a really deep dive into the history of the Cultural Revolution. And during that period of time, teachers were actually the targets during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, 1960s, 70s in China. And it struck me as how the whole thing was a student-led revolution, and many students were betraying their teachers. They were turning them in. And, all these like public struggle sessions for teachers, and the kind of the parallels between that period of time and what's going on now is a little harrowing. I do think we're kind of seeing the authority gradient between teacher and student get diluted a little. And now, what you saw with described with Brett Weinstein and Nicholas Christakis is a bit of a manifestation of that, where the students were yelling at them, "What do you know? What are you telling a tenured Yale professor? What do you know? This is about creating a home. This is not about education." Like that stuff was like, to me, I see shades of what happened decades ago, and we're not learning from it, right? And so you're a history teacher, you teach, civics and social studies. And yet in California, we're making it requirements for all these students to take ethnic studies. And it seems like, look, time is finite. We have, only a certain number of hours a day. And for every hour not spent teaching real history, and math or something that will help students become good citizens is an hour that, is robbing these kids of a good chance at life. And I worry about this, what's happening with this lack of, especially not teaching history properly, because it does end up, the reason why these wacky ideas seem to take root so easily now is because they're not learning, like you made a very good point in that video that we reference, about owning property. You said, because one of the teachers said that slavery, whiteness was rooted in owning other people as property, right? And you brought up the point, you challenged that. You said, well, this is not, white people didn't have a monopoly on owning other people. Like other people around the world all cultures almost had owned other people. And you brought up that point. And then she kind of had to pivot and say, like, well, we're only talking about whiteness here. Like, this is how it manifested here. But I feel like if history was taught properly, right, that this would immediately be something that pops up in students' head, and they would question, like, the moment, they are taught this concept of whiteness, or they see the Smithsonian Museum put out concepts of whiteness, they would start questioning, like, what does this mean? Like, I thought we were taught this, right? So how can we go back to that? What is this impediment that seems to be depriving students of being taught real history?
Yeah, there's like a focus. There's a real focus on the right wing side of it, like whatever, like order chaos. That's a Jordan Peterson thing, like the Nazi element, right? Because Nazism isn't worse than like Stalinism or Maoist China. Like when you talk about like numbers wise or anything like that, but it has like the racist element to it. I don't know. The whole thing is. It's really frustrating that they're not getting it. Here's an interesting like fact. In 1800, there were 195 countries, and maybe it's not exactly accurate. I'm usually like 90% right with my facts. There's some little thing off, but
you don't need to be. There's Google, so you don't have to be.
Yeah. In 1800, I believe there was 195 countries, and slavery was legal in 194. And So, and then now that slavery is legal in like 3 countries, like North Korea and like, I don't know, Turkmenistan or something like that. So there's something that changed. So to say like, so I saw a teacher posted something like, I'm not celebrating the 4th because when it was established, my people weren't free. It's like, I know, like that, it's not good, but everything was bad. And the way I think about this, I'm always thinking through like metaphor for like my students to try and help them understand. It's like to go up to someone and say, you're not a good runner because you used to be able to just crawl. It's like, we were all crawling, man. Like we evolved. We evolved as a species. Human beings have evolved a lot to go from like, it's fine to own other people to it's not fine to own other people. So why are we holding the standard? I think it's just a myopic view of like that America is somehow unique. We're not unique in our horribleness. We had horribleness, but we're not unique in that. We're unique in being like the country that was established on these Enlightenment principles to bring in that then spread throughout the world. So there's no conflict for me. Like that makes sense. So I talk about a lot of really terrible things in history, and I shock my students about the atrocities of slavery and racist actions and the Black Wall Street and stuff like that, and talk about the thriving communities also. Like you have to talk about both. You have to give the reality that even during segregation, in a lot of ways, Black communities were doing better. So what is that? And the kids are like, well, that's confusing. I liked it when I had a simple understanding of things. I was like, well, sorry, that's not education then. My kids get really, really frustrated. My students get really frustrated because they're like, I knew I was right. And then I left your class and I don't even know what's what anymore. It's like, yeah, well, that's the way it kind of should be. You got to figure it out.
But I think a fair pushback to what you're saying about America and the 4th of July and slavery and things is, America is unique, not in having slavery, but it is unique in its hypocrisy as founding itself on the ideals of all men are created equal and that we are endowed with inalienable rights, while a third of the country is in chains and literally being abused and subjected to horrific torture. I think we're unique there. I think it's fun, for us to parade ourselves as George Carlin said, we're a nation of, we were founded by slave owners who wanted to be free, right? The inherent hypocrisy there is, I think, unique. So that's fair, I would say.
Yeah.
What do you think about
100%. And I think when that kind of stuff does get brought up by my students, and that's a great point. So like if we were in a class and I would say like, yes, absolutely. But I think of America as an idea. It's the idea. And there was a lot of contention even at our founding, before our founding, about slavery, women's rights, all that kind of stuff. Like that was still going on. But they said, all right, well, so what we're going to do is we have to establish this now. We have to come together now, and then we'll set up pathways, channels to deal with this stuff down the road and find compromise and work our way through it. So but like, I think if we view America as an idea of this, that all men are created equal, that's the idea. It's not that we're doing it. It's like you have an aim though. Like we have our country has like a bullseye that we're aiming for. I think that's probably a better way to approach it, because then you can get around like, yes, there was a lot of hypocrisy, and that was part of the process to get us to where we're at now, and then hopefully where we're going to be in the future, which is a way more, like a Sheena Mason type approach.
We love Sheena here.
Yeah, she's awesome.
And I think, we were talking a little bit before recording about the 4th of July and specifically Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech and the way that he himself used the Declaration of Independence and used the Constitution and said, it's at the seeds of slavery's undoing are right here in this document, because nowhere in this document is slavery, ratified. So it's kind of, maybe it's a little bit revisionist and maybe it's a little bit rose-colored to say, but it seems that perhaps in spite of themselves, the founders sort of set a bomb that was only going to go off, 100 plus years later. But it was there.
Look, even if it is rose-colored glasses, like what approach do you want to take? You get, if you're going to choose the way to view this country that you're living in your situation, why not choose to say this was made for me? Like it's just going to serve you better. It's the same thing that's going on in the classroom is, the kids who are going to the best schools, the Ivy League schools and stuff like that, they're not the best and brightest. They're really not. Like I've taught in the hood and I've taught in like wealthy Bel Air kids and stuff like that. And the kids who end up going to Columbia, sometimes they're brilliant and sometimes their dad donated a library. So I taught kids who were, like Mexican, like gangster kids with neck tattoos when they were 15 years old, who were selling weed and stuff like that, who were brilliant, like really, really brilliant. Not like, I'm like, oh, you're smart too, like patronizing way. Like really, like this kid was born in Marin County. He'd be an engineer for Google type of brilliant. And so I think that what's happening with the model curriculum and ethnic studies and stuff, ethnic studies can be done well, sure. But what we got to do is, there is untapped resources. It's foolish. It's a foolish approach, even for corporations and stuff, to say it's like drilling for oil. We're drilling for oil in the same areas over and over and over again. Harvard, Westlake, and whatever it is, the Dalton School or whatever it is. We're going the same wells, where there are wells that are just bubbling with good crude right in Watts. Like there really are. We just have to find a way we got to get a special kind of drill bit to get in there. And we're just too lazy to do it, or we're not seeing it. But I think it's a real mistake. I think that it's a shame how much untapped genius we have. And we're focusing on telling them that they're not geniuses. We're telling them that they're not capable of doing anything because the world is out to get them, the country's out to get them, where what these kids need is encouragement and a real belief that like they can go out and just kill it because they can.
And mentorship. I think that's so much, that is lacking in some of these communities. They need a teacher to be there with them and have lunch with them every day, or, just be a really good mentor. It just seems like, I mean, I look back at my education, that the things you end up liking are the things are the topics that you had really good teachers in. Like this is, you'll hear people, like kids say like, oh, I hated chemistry. Yeah. But most of the time if you drill down a little bit, they just had a really bad chemistry teacher. They have a good experience in the class. Yeah. It's almost like that makes such a big difference, even for kids deciding later on, what am I going to pursue as an entire career? Like teachers have that impact, right? And it's huge. It's formative. So I can't stress just how much what teachers are doing. Like you said, like in your intro, you're like, oh, I'm just a teacher. It's not just. I think that's kind of like playing down how important teachers are, right? Like, and then you said you cringe when like, oh, influencer. You are an influencer in so many kids' lives, and it's a lot of trust, right? Like for parents too. And it's right now what's going on in schools is like this teacher parent trust is now breaking down. You're seeing that with what's happening with gender ideology. Some of these TikTok videos that that Twitter account Libs of TikTok have been blasting out with like teachers just kind of what they're posting themselves on TikTok, talking about how they're indoctrinating the kids and everything, and is breaking down now this trust between teachers and parents. And I do worry because they used to work a lot closer in concert, and kids are ultimately harmed when that trust is broken. Have you experienced any of this? Are you hearing a lot about this from fellow teachers?
From what part in particular?
The trust issue, like how now parents are, like distrustful of teachers.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that about teaching. Here's the thing, though, is I was having dinner with someone who has like a really big podcast, and I don't need to say her name, but like, hundreds of thousands of downloads, everything. And they are in these circles, like whatever, like the big podcast circles. And I said, do you guys ever talk to really smart, you guys on here have had really like big names, powerful, intellectuals and stuff. Like how often does K through 12 education really come up? Like it's almost never. I don't think Joe Rogan, biggest podcast in the world, has ever had a teacher on, like has ever really discussed the education system. Like I understand and I appreciate like the props. I really do. I'm not just saying that. Like I agree with you. But it's interesting how little people seem to care about the school. Like I think people get into it for politics, critical race theory or no, but like, I haven't heard Steven Pinker talk about it. Like I would like to. Like what is he's super genius. What do we do about the education system? It's a little frustrating how much people say like, oh, teach what you do is really important. But the reason that I downplay it is now that I'm in this like kind of social media podcast world to some degree, like it feels very much just like, oh, you just what you do isn't like real intellectual, or what you do isn't really important. I mean, it's actually very interesting how little, Sam Harris has ever talked about education or something like that.
I think I have a theory about that though, because my theory about why that is because, well, two things. One is, Steven Pinker teaches at university level. That's kind of all he knows, right? So that's one. And then the other one is, honestly, a lot of the big podcast people, they're not really sending their kids to public schools. Okay, they're probably sending their kids to private schools like yours, where this isn't that much of an issue. Yeah. And it's clearly big enough for the middle class. For the average American, they care so much about what's happening to K to 12, right? That's the reason why Chris Rufo has blown up to be the person, the activist, journalist that he is right now. It's because he's made this a bread and butter issue. And so there's a bit of a gap between the elite intellectual and what he or she cares about and the average person. So I think the average person actually is really motivated by this. But the problem is your big podcaster that has like Joe Rogan's not sending his kid to public school. So he doesn't really care or no.
No, my friend actually taught his daughter. It wasn't in public school. Yeah. I mean, so middle America does it, but like, even if you take like the intellectual podcast space, like they don't discuss it much, but then you go to like whatever, like Logan Paul doesn't talk about it. So it's almost like nowhere in like a mainstream, like this, whatever these channels are, this podcasting, social media world seems to be discussing it. And the ones that are in talking about education are the ones who are very politically whatever woke, like the ones that I talk about and talk to and stuff like that. There's very few. Like I fell into this because I think that I'm tapping into what you're saying. Like people in middle, most people that follow me are just like moms from whatever, like Illinois or something like that. And they're like, thank you. But like, I think that there's just not a lot of it. And I don't know, but it's going back to what you said. Yeah. About the trust. For sure. I think that you're giving kids an easy out. And I've had several friends who, my students know they can't pull it with me. But I have a lot of friends who's, if they fail a kid, the kid will just play a race card. Like they'll just say, you failed because of this. And like, they have to have their ducks in line. So when you call that, you go in front of the administration and you have to show, here's what an A paper looks like. Here's what a B paper looks like. You have to like have it all lined up. Happened to a good friend of mine just recently. So you're giving kids a lot of power. When I was in high school, if I could have played that card, oh my gosh, why would I not? High school kids, I love teenagers, man. They're the best because they're so just like looking for the holes in the system. Well, like the velociraptors on the fence in Jurassic Park.
As we know from your 23andMe, you definitely can't play that card.
No.
You couldn't have.
Yeah,
it'll be like German and English. No.
Oh my gosh. I'm just such an oppressor.
You failed me because I don't get poison ivy.
I'm colorblind. No one gives a crap about that though.
But it seems like the problem is that the biggest podcasters either don't have children or they send their children to private school. So I don't know how many. I don't know how many. I don't know if Logan Paul has kids, right? But it's like, those influencers don't have kids, probably.
Yeah, they said something like that. Like, why would I care if I don't have kids? That's what he said to me. Those guys, like, I was like,
which is crazy. Yeah,
I don't know. Do you care about society? Like,
yeah, that's crazy.
Ignorance is like these people running around with terrible ideas and who are super uneducated is bad. Yeah. Having literacy rates where they are is just terrible for everyone. Like, what do you mean? Yep. Like, why are you thinking so selfishly?
Like, if anything, I mean, that's the thing. To me, like, my conception of it is like the most selfish thing you can do is to think about and care about everybody else because you have to live with everybody. Like these people are going to be on the road next to you. You kind of want them to know how to drive, right? These people are going to be filing paperwork for you. You kind of want them to know how to read. Like all these, you're going to be interacting with people. Nobody's an island, right?
Yeah, but they're isolated, right? People get isolated behind gates and fences, and then eventually something will jump over that. Yeah.
It's just weird though. But even then, it's like, well, why would you want the other side of the fence or the other side of your gate to be dangerous or not something you want to be around, right? Now you're stuck in your house. It just sucks. Like, why wouldn't you that's my thing, is just the best thing you could do for yourself is to be good to others and to try and make it so that other people are living their best lives. Because then when you walk out, you're surrounded by people who are happy and fulfilled and creative and coming up with cool stuff that you never would have thought of, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it seems so simple to me too.
Yeah, I guess the simplicity is the point, right? That's the simplicity is the difficulty. But you are doing something really remarkable. Your Instagram, you have a very, very large following, and the content that you're putting out is so fantastic. And I just would love, before we get to the last question, would love if you just talked a little bit about your approach. Your focus. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we have a lot in common with this. Your focus is all about drilling down into the uniting principles.
Yeah.
What you call the uniting principles. Tell us a little bit about that, and how that shapes your worldview and how you approach, myriad topics, from, the gender thing. Like you just did a post about the What is a Woman documentary. You did a post about, you've done stuff about CRT. You've done all this stuff. And it seems like that's the unifying sort of thing for you.
Yeah, I chose Instagram, not Twitter. I don't know why. I think it was just the one that my wife uses for her business. So I was like, all right, yeah, I'll use this. And I didn't know anything about social media. So I didn't know the rules to it, which is nice. Like my students will say like, oh, I like this girl. And I was like, well, just send her a direct message. Like, you can't just slide in the DMs like that. Like, why? You can't. So I started just putting ideas out there to kind of always look for, here's my idea. Where is this wrong? And then it just kind of like could form, and I could show my face. I thought the personal element was really important, because a lot of people who are mean to me, they don't show their faces, and or it's all just like, it's like all anonymous. I'm very open. I don't show like my kid. I don't show like a lot of like, here's my address or anything, but like I'm pretty, upfront about like, this is me. So I put these ideas out there, and sometimes people are really upset. And I shared this with John Haidt actually like 2 weeks ago, because he's very vocal about the negatives of social media, particularly Instagram. So I said, let me show you what I'm doing here. So I got my phone. I went to my account and I was like, okay, here's someone that was really upset with me in like a comment section. And here's what I did. I do this often, is I'll go to that person and I'll go slide in the DMs and I'll go to a video. And I'll sometimes be like playing with my kid or something like that. And I'll be like, hey, my name is Will. I'm a real person. This is my son, right? Okay. And I'll and then I'll say like, okay, so I must have said something that really upset you. That was not my intention. I'm here trying to figure it out. I'm just a teacher. Like, would you be open to having a discussion with me where we can try and work this out and see where we agree and disagree? I do that. Okay. And then a lot of times they'll just like block me or whatever it is, or if not block me, then they'll, ignore me. But sometimes they come back and they're like, I didn't expect you to respond. Or they'll say something like, yeah, I will. And then I go take it to an Instagram live conversation. And then I'm always trying to find like common ground and why do you think what you think and all that kind of stuff. And I'm batting close to 1,000 for the people that choose to engage with me, of like getting them to kind of understand a little bit, soften up a little bit. I learn something, they learn something. Even if I don't learn like change my mind, I learn about why they think what they think. Like some of these people who have these radical ideas, they've been hurt in a whole bunch of different ways. They've had certain experiences. That's valuable to me too. So I think social media is a really awesome tool for uniting people and getting to know people. There was a teacher, we were teaching on Zoom during COVID. And this woman named Brittany Caldwell's classroom, she is like one of those influential teachers. She's great. She's a Black woman who teaches at an all-Black school in Georgia. She was. And I was like, man, these Zoom classes suck. She's like, yeah. I was like, why don't we just unite our classes? So we did. So I connected with her, and then we united our two classes, me at this like Jewish school and her at this, all-Black school in Atlanta. And then we put them in the breakout rooms of like groups of 4, and they just talked. And it was so cool. And I was like, social media, you can do that on social media. If you're like, what is it like to be a MAGA hat wearing trans person? Find one, send them a DM, send them a video, be like, I didn't know you existed. You're like a unicorn. Tell me about your experience. You can do that. Wow. And it's shocking how people just use social media for divisive, toxic, gross, just when they could be using it for educational purposes. And I think that's what I'm using it for. And I love it. I think it's really, really great.
That's amazing. Yeah. I have a similar experience on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it's very common.
No, but I think that's our job, is to make it more common. And, I'm glad you are kind of challenging that, that notion that social media is inherently toxic, because I think it's the same kind of argument people make about science, that science is inherently toxic. Look at all the crap it brings us, but not focusing on the fact that it can do a lot of good as well. Just to see it, just in that way. Again, it really is how you use it, right? And so you're modeling the behavior that you want to see in the world. So I think that's
right.
Very, very powerful. We're just going to wrap up and ask you the same last question that we asked everybody else. In a way, I think your entire philosophy already kind of answers this question, but we're looking for something a bit pithier. Our focus at FAIR is providing pro-human alternatives to some the issues that we deal with every day. What does being pro-human mean to you, and how can everyday people take a pro-human approach to these issues in their lives and also in their communities?
Yeah, I have 3 kids. So I have a 10-month-old now and a 7 and a 5-year-old. And it's really neat to watch. My 10-month-old he's sinless. He's perfect. He doesn't do anything wrong. And then my 5-year-old, he lies sometimes and he does things, but he does it for protective purposes. He does it because he's scared. He does it for a whole bunch of different reasons. And then when you're raising kids like this, and then I'm around teenagers all the time, and like you get to know them, and they do some bad things. You go, they're not a bad person. They're acting this way for a reason. So the pro-human approach is just to recognize that people have really flawed actions and decisions. I have a friend who's a therapist for convicted pedophiles. And I made a joke that was like, basically that they should be like killed. And she was like, how many of my clients do you think were horribly sexually abused themselves as kids? I was like, I don't know. She's like, 100%. They're created monsters. We don't excuse bad behaviors, hurting people, anything like that, but we can understand it and we can see the humanity in these horrible acting people. I think that that's the best approach. I think that if we can do that through channels of social media and things like that, I think that it's the best pathway forward. And I hope it's the inevitable pathway forward. And I'd rather get there sooner rather than later. But just seeing people as like we're all messed up, and we all have our reasons why we act the way that we do. And I think that helping people to engage with them, help them to you should try to see them the way that they wish to be seen. So they are putting off some sort of thing out into the world that they want you to see them this way. So acknowledging that they actually care about the way that they're perceived and things, I think that helps as well. But yeah, I love talking to different people, especially people that I disagree with, because I always learn about why we disagree. And I think that's useful too.
That's very powerful. Thank you, Will, for joining us on Fair Perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really great. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Fair Perspectives. If you'd like to support the show, you can do it by subscribing on YouTube and on your favorite podcast platform, and leaving us a positive rating and review. You can also access exclusive podcast content, such as Q&As and bonus episodes, by visiting us and signing up at fairperspectives.org. For weekly FAIR news and opinion pieces by members of the FAIR community, visit our Substack at fairforall.substack.com, and tune into FAIR News Weekly wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to join or support the pro-human movement, visit us at fairforall.org/join us. Thanks again, and see you next time.